how's been your whole journey from Venezuela to start a company and now Alliance?
What were the challenging conditions in the market at the time that didn't allow your startup to flourish?
I think what the strength of Latin American founders that live in Latin America is that we're really good at sales. We have our developers are decent. If I have to be super honest, I think one of the reasons why we are stagnant in Latin America and in the world is...
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Frontera, the podcast where we analyze frontier markets and we talk with the top builders in the crypto industry. I'm Ab, co-founder and CEO of Espacio Crypto and Bando. I'm with my great friend Kush, founder of Odisea Labs. And today we have Simon. Simon is the head of growth at Alliance, one of the most important crypto accelerators in the world. And we're really excited because we're starting to collaborate more. So, Simon, how's everything, man? How are you?
Great. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here and see if we can make some interesting conversations and provide some value for the listeners.
Amazing. Dude, well, thank you for coming once again. And I think that your trajectory is super interesting. You've gone through Y Combinator, you started different crypto companies. Now you're leading growth at Alliance. Could you walk us through a little bit of your experience? You're also from Venezuela. So, how's been your whole journey from Venezuela to start a company and now Alliance?
Yeah, so I guess that just talking about crypto and Venezuela, this is not new. I guess it's very common for a lot of the Venezuelan people involved in crypto to be that our involvement is completely related to living through hyperinflation. And the reality is that hyperinflation, living through it is much different than just technically understanding it. The amount of loss of purchasing power, the amount of little tricks and day-to-day things that you have to go through in a hyperinflationary economy is it changes you as a person. So when I learned about Bitcoin and about Ethereum in 2015, it was basically, at least for me personally, was a calling, and I was like, okay, this could be the most important thing to work on. And I've been interested in the space, and since then, since 2015, learning about it, building around it, helping builders in the space. And as I mentioned to you, Abraham, on our launch the other day, it's like the thing that has been stuck with me for the longest time in my life, more than any career, any job, any girlfriend. And so basically that's that. Venezuela for me was an experience of experiencing hyperinflation and currency devaluation and just political instability. I was only in Venezuela until I was very young. Then I started moving around. I went to live in Spain. I went to school in the United States for industrial design, actually. So it was an art major. And despite the fact that I was not very entrepreneurial as a kid, meaning that I wasn't the typical, person that was buying cheap and selling a little bit more expensive in school as a kid and being very entrepreneurial, I was very interested in being a founder and starting companies, at least from what my parents tell me. And studying industrial design was, in a way, a bet on that path, meaning that as an industrial designer, you design products and you create products, and then you have to sell them and you have to produce them and you have to understand everything that it goes around them, how to price them. And I did study that with that intention, but I didn't like the career over time. I did graduated from it. But as soon as I graduated from it, I got a job at a tech accelerator. And that's when I learned about Bitcoin and Ethereum. And I just moved away from kind of the art world into kind of sales, growth, product-led roles. But with that kind of background of learning how to talk to customers, learning how to do research before building a product. Like industrial design is a very entrepreneurial career, I have to say, despite that I didn't really enjoy it to become a professional in it. That was basically it. And it took me, since I first learned about Bitcoin and Ethereum, about 2 years working for other startups and other founders, which I highly recommend for anybody. Like if you're not sure what to build and you want to build something, before you find that passion, that thing that you actually care about and that you can build for a decade, the best thing that you can do is just find really good founders to work for and learn from them. So that's what I did. And in late 2017, after almost 3 years of working for other people, I decided to start my own crypto company. Was one of the first stablecoin neobank remittance products in the region. We actually, together with that, back in the day, USDC, USDT were very small companies still. So we decided to try to create our own stablecoin, and we created the first Bitcoin-backed stablecoin in the world that we are very sure of, like in terms of like time scale. But it was a failed experiment, so we ended up using USDC in the end. And we went through YC and learned a lot during that process. And I guess, tackling the Venezuelan market, the Colombian market, and other Latin American markets, having to deal with a lot of the uncertainty there, having to deal with places where there's no KYC, good KYC APIs, like Venezuela, or back in the day, a lot of these KYC products were actually not that good. Having to build a product that is like very low weight, so that people with like shitty phones in Latin America can download it and use it. Learning how to build potentially offline protocols so that when there's no power, people can send money to each other. It just worked. It was just like a lot of challenges. And we obviously made a lot of mistakes from first-time founders. We raised a lot of money, so we scaled the team too quickly. We were doing a lot of things that were not priorities. We had some sort of product market fit, and we kind of like started scaling into things too quickly. And I have to say, like, every founder journey is really hard, but like starting a company that has users in a market like Venezuela, in a hyperinflationary narco state, and like using crypto back in the day when there was like no infrastructure like Privy, like it was just much harder to build a non-custodial product. So we ended up building custodial products, which was the antithesis. My journey was really, really tough as a founder. And so we decided to, for multiple reasons, maybe you guys if you guys are interested, I can share a little bit more light on that, but we decided to shut the company down. We had a lot of revenue in Bitcoin, like a lot of our revenues were held in Bitcoin. So we were able to pay back almost in full our investors, and help all of our team get new jobs. We paid a nice compensation package to all of our team, despite that we, were shutting down. And just to protect our reputations. And one of our investors was Imran, from one of the founders at Alliance. And long story short, I started collaborating for Alliance as soon as I shut down the company. And a few months later, they invited me to join full time to lead the growth team. And I've been with them 4 years. At Alliance, basically helping Alliance grow as an accelerator, as a fund, and mentoring our founders and our alumni on their growth plans and strategies.
There is so much that I want to dive into what you just shared, Simon. I think everything from being from Venezuela, and as you said, having this really deep innate calling towards saying, how do I build something that is this deep passion, right? It's not just something that you're doing because it'll bring you some sort of inflow, but rather something that you just feel this really deep calling and resonance with. I think that's really important. I think that's probably something that we oftentimes see with a lot of people from the region as well. But I'm curious to hear more around, and then there's all of this sort of building the first Bitcoin-backed stablecoin, right? Which in and of itself is really fascinating. Like, what do you think in the Latin American market specifically? Like, what were the challenging conditions in the market at the time that didn't allow your startup to flourish? And how has the market evolved over the course of the last 7 years since you started working on kind of specifically tackling the Latin markets?
Yeah, the nice answer to that is that the infrastructure for building non-custodial crypto products just wasn't there. And as a freedom maximalist, as a person who is interested in Bitcoin and in financial freedom and independence and sovereignty from the state, and I think that the money should be separated from the state, I was really trying to build a non-custodial product for people to hold stable coins and potentially Bitcoin, and just pay each other, and custody and have the custody themselves. So that we as a company don't have the power to do anything with that money unless the user decides to get some interest and then use some protocol that we can route it to. But the infrastructure just wasn't there. So we ended up building a centralized product, which then you have to really walk a really fine line between that and figuring out, if you're a bank, which rules apply to you, which fintech rules apply to you. And as you know, I'm going to go into the I guess harder answer, and the non-political answer, which is in Latin America, and many other countries in the world, banks have a lot of power to do lobbying, and in general, big companies and wealthy people have a lot of power to do lobbying, and big industries and dictate regulations. And so in some countries in Latin America, or in most countries, banks are really slowing down innovation and slowing down the speed at which crypto companies can be built, so that banks catch up to it. And so they started building all these sandboxes, and they were highly golf clapped and all this shit. But the reality is that they were creating all these fintech regulations that had a lot of limitations compared to banks. And so as building a custodial product, then you end up building something that is highly limited based on what the regulations are for that. And even before there were regulations, you had to find gray areas to operate in. And luckily, we were, I think, in Colombia, the first company to figure out how to do on and off ramps from crypto to fiat, because we found I think we were the first company to find this kind of legal loophole and gray area to work on. And then it was pretty standard. It was actually quite simple. So everybody started doing the same thing. And now there's a bunch of companies in Colombia or in Mexico or in some countries using the same, I think, model for doing all of the on and off ramps and stuff like that. And since then, again, there's a lot of sandboxes in places and stuff. But yeah, I would say those are the two verticals in which it's hard to build a crypto company in Latin America. One is you have to go against these very big players that have a lot of power to dictate, and they actually want to have a piece of your business, which is not the same in the United States. In the United States, banks are so big that fintechs and crypto companies have a big space for them to flourish. In Latin America, the economies are a little bit smaller, so banks do want to take a piece of the pie for everything, and they want to play that game. And secondly, is infrastructure. Nowadays, what has changed is that now we have a lot more infra, both in the EVM world and in the Solana space and other chains. And companies, self-custodial companies that are offering a good user experience can be built for people on any kind of, let's say, socioeconomic part of the pyramid, despite whatever phone they use or things like that. Even with Starlink being a potential provider when things go wrong in some regions. And the other thing that has potentially changed is that because the United States is pro crypto friendly, And a lot of the countries in Latin America and in general in the world are just subject to the Federal Reserve, and they have a lot of they get influenced a lot by United States policy. I think we're just going to see a little bit more of like velocity in regulations, pro crypto regulations, just following the example of the United States, which is pretty good. Honestly, it's from that perspective, it's not a bad thing. And I think that those are probably like the main differences.
I think that thesis today is still inevitable. Like that self-custodial wallet that's localized and that solves those type of, like, enables people to saving in Bitcoin, in Ether, Sol, whatever, access better financial instruments with everything that Robinhood is doing with tokenizing stocks. It'll happen. A fun story is that actually when we started Bando, that was our thesis, because coming out of Bitso, we saw like this is needed, and when we started deep diving on whatever we needed to do, on ramps were a huge problem. Like the custody was already solved with Privy Portal, and you can connect with LeFi and do like obtain all the liquidity. But the problem we're still on ramping, on and off ramping. And today I think that we are, I don't know, maybe months away from a good team cracking that solution. In Bando, we realized that the users that we were having were doing a lot of payments, stablecoins and payments. That was last year before the stablecoin summer, so that's when we like doubled down on this thesis. But I think actually there are a couple of teams in the region that are building really exciting stuff under that thesis. We'll chat with them eventually when they come out of stealth mode. And I actually, that's a really interesting thing that I want to chat with you, because last week we met at New York, we had a great lunch, and you were telling me how much you learn from being in Alliance, because basically you just meet brilliant kids, well, not only kids, like brilliant founders building the next generation of crypto products, and they are just so energizing and building on the frontier. Also, you funded a couple of companies in frontier markets in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, some other regions. So I'd love to know, you have a like contact with the frontier of crypto today and for the past 4 years. How do you see these markets evolving? Like, which are the main things that you see that founders are trying to build in these regions? And also, what's the appetite for something like Alliance, thinking as a fund on how to deploy capital in these regions, in frontier markets?
Yeah. Well, that's a multi question, multi answer as well. I'll try to answer it in the best way possible, but I do think that one, in crypto, the innovation is slow. Like in terms of like, there are not that many new products that need to be built, and like even just like the building blocks haven't necessarily been built all over the world. And I think it's been a little bit of a timing problem. And, you know, VCs just keep on throwing money at different founders, trying kind of like almost like building the same thing with a little tweak, and trying to figure out is that maybe now is the right timing, or maybe now these founders have a unique insight or have a unique kind of competitive advantage in a specific market, and they just kind of continue doing this. And we've seen some examples of success, you know, like Bridge got acquired by Stripe. I don't know if that is success in terms of like being an acquisition, or just because of like, you know, how much impact Bridge has had in the region. I do see that like there is a trend of companies that are building infrastructure like that. We actually just funded another company building something like Bridge in Brazil called Unblock Pay, and they obviously will kind of continue to expand to other places in Latin America, but they're highly regional, like region focused. And Bridge does work in Brazil, but Bridge works everywhere, and they have like no specific focus. And I think, you know, having a little bit of a wedge in a specific market will pay off over time. And so in frontier economies, or frontier markets, emerging markets, I think, you know, stable coins is the obvious play. And a lot of the founders, I think, at least in Latin America, I think what the strength of Latin American founders that live in Latin America is that we're really good at sales. We have like our developers are decent in terms of compared at a global scale. When you compare like developers that live in Latin America compared to developers that live in the United States, the people that live in the United States are definitely at a higher level. But in Latin America, we're really good at sales. And I think that's an important aspect to keep into consideration, because that means that for a lot of the boring businesses that are typically not technically so hard, but that need a lot of business development, a lot of relationships, a lot of like potential working with regulators, with banks and stuff like that, Latin Americans or people in emerging markets will potentially have an edge. And so that's something that I see a lot. So I don't see a lot of like high tech founders living in Latin America building high tech. If they are Latin American, they move to SF. They generally move to San Francisco or to New York and build their companies here in the United States rather than in Latin America. So I would say that that's an important differentiation. And also, apart from stable coins, we also see, I see the potential of like what people call DePIN, like decentralized physical infrastructure networks. I think that is also highly regionalized. And if we can find some good DePIN applications that are specific to certain regions, that can also be a potential interesting thing to fund locally in those markets. There's probably more that I'm missing, but I think those are two very kind of easy ones for sure.
It's funny because Ab and I, and we've written about this as well in the past in Frontera, is the fact that we have the problems that need to be addressed in Latin America, whether that's inflation, corruption, poor financial infrastructure, centralization of different sort of institutions and so forth. So clearly blockchains and distributed systems have a really important role to play here in the region. Then why have we not seen this massive adoption happen yet, right? And I think like talent, as you mentioned, there's this massive talent gap where if you are the type of founder that is maybe you went to Stanford or you went to MIT, then you're probably just going to stay in the US. You're not necessarily going to come back to the region and either build here or build for the region as well, right? I would love to dive deeper into like some of the founders that you work with, and to the extent to which you can share insights on, what are the founders that have gone through Alliance, like what are some of the traits and qualities that you've seen people that are operating in the region really excel and thrive in? You mentioned sales is a really strong point. Engineering may not be a strong point necessarily, or as strong as it would be elsewhere. And perhaps we can generalize this as well, thinking about like other emerging markets, like what is really unique about founders coming from the region that have gone through Alliance that you've thought, okay, these are traits that we don't find in other folks coming through these programs?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to think of something else, but to me that tends like it's a little bit the same answer of what I was saying before. It really goes back to founders being good at like sales, business development. I think Latin Americans, we also have this I guess advantage that talent is cheaper. So maybe like our time frames and our timelines are a little bit bigger. I would say this is actually an important characteristic. Runway can last way longer in Latin America as long as the founders are disciplined. If you're a first-time founder, you might make the mistake of scaling your team too quickly, and then you also end up paying too much. But like if you're very discipline around money, you can make it last longer, and then you can actually focus. You can have a longer term vision. An example of this is we have a founder who is from Panama, and he's building an exchange in Panama, and he's only focused in Panama, which seems to be really a small market, and it is compared to others. But he recently started after, I think, 2 or 3 years of stagnation in terms of like them building product, being really highly focused, being under the shadows, and it all like they started hitting gold, and their growth is started to go like as a hockey stick recently, and the volumes are decent. They're actually pretty good. And now with the progress that they're doing, if they continue down this route, they can either expand to a new market, maybe just one other market in like Central America or something like that, or they could potentially get acquired for a few $100 million from a big exchange, and that's also a decent outcome for the founders, as long as they haven't diluted themselves too much. And that's amazing. And so I think another potential aspect here for emerging markets is that it's like the fact that we could potentially play these like hyper localized games, and we could also use the money more effectively to like play the longer game. But even though might not be the case in every time, it's a benefit that we have, and that I see some founders do. It's a path that I see some founders take.
Yeah, I want to add a lot to that, because also I think that, well, in Frontera, we wrote this essay. I'm going to share this mental model that we created, that we called it the Latam trilemma, because the thing is that we see that we have a ton of problems in Latin America, and that's exciting. You come to our countries, and not everything works great. And that's a big opportunity for founders, for talented people to solve. And being as a working in product companies in the region, and being completely honest with what we have a talent gap still in Latin America. I think that we have great people, definitely, and those great people either leave or start companies. But there's a big opportunity for people from everywhere around the world to come to Latin America and other frontier markets and build different technology companies. And this is based out of experience. This is a scientific approach. So let's think of maybe two really exciting crypto related companies today, or let's say three. Dollar App, those guys are one American and two Spanish. Bridge, basically American founders, and Etherfuse, American people building in the region. So they are covering this gap, like this differential, they are closing that. And I think that that's great for our region, because that upskill the future founders. Like my founders and I come out of Bitso, and if Bitso didn't existed, we could not create this, because we have the product discipline and everything built out of that. And then there's big opportunity that I think that not a lot of people are looking at. That is the capital gap, also gap in capital is huge. Like I did fundraising for Bando. I talked to all Mexican VCs. None of them understood anything. Just one, and that one invested. So, and when I didn't talk to American investors, because just like in the angel round, I didn't want to do that. I know that when I go there, we need to go with with a global play. We're not Latin American. We are building in this niche and going global. So I think that when you see this, for any VC that finds a really talented founder, as we have a big opportunity and also the market is big, it might be a good investment for them to invest in a good company in Latin America, and in frontier markets. So I want to close this episode with you, Simon. First of all, what do you think of this simple mental model? Does it make sense? Any gap that you see here?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have so many problems, and it's interesting. I don't really know exactly, if there's like a specific trilemma of four lemma here. If there's like a specific like fourth thing that we're not looking at, but yeah, I think in general, if I have to be super honest, I think one of the reasons why we are stagnant in Latin America and in the world is over regulation, or just kind of these issues here. Like regulation really stops things from happening, and so I think that plays a big role, because right now, to be quite honest, like VCs there was a time where YC invested heavily in Latin America. They stopped doing that a little bit. And now, specifically for the crypto space, VCs continue to invest in emerging markets. At least from Alliance, I can tell from personal experience, we invest in founders that are focused in APAC, founders that are focused in India, founders that are focused in Southeast Asia, founders that are focused in Latin America, and we don't care about these global plays. We care about them solving the problem for the people where they are initially and just winning, even if it's a niche, small market. The reality is that most VCs don't even understand the size of the market. Not even the founders understand the size of the market. A lot of the times those markets kind of like open up for you after you kind of solve a problem for a specific set of people. And so I just wanted to say that, I mean, at least at Alliance, we are funding hyper localized people, companies and people solving problems in specific regions, and we don't care about this global place. And I wouldn't be surprised if other VCs are also kind of doing the same as we are. So capital potentially is still available. And it's funny that you mentioned all these founders that have been successful in Latin America, not being from Latin America, but because it tends to be the case that you as a VC want to fund the people that are from the country. That's like the typical basic knowledge. It's like, why would I fund a gringo building in Brazil?
Yeah.
But the reality is that, well, maybe it can be successful, and it's and so it just goes to show that like all these mental models are flawed from the beginning. You really never know who will be successful and where and why. So you have to go back to other type of mental frameworks, like who is the founder, what have they done before, how well can they express themselves, how well can they sell themselves, and you have a little bit of data points, but it tends to be the case that like founder, like location. When you're early stage, you really have to focus on the people, the founders, and as you said, maybe they're not from the region, but they can definitely solve a problem there. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, what I say is that these founders have access to capital, like big seed rounds of maybe $5 million, $10 million, or higher. So they have enough time to grow, and also they have enough money to fund talented locals that can act as their translators in the market. We're gonna actually, you just gave me the idea of writing this essay about that, because how come the most successful crypto companies in Latin America are not from crypto, like from Latin founders? So we'll explore that under this thesis. And Simon, well, Kush, I don't know if you want to add something, or let's close.
Yeah, I think the final question on my end, Simon, would be, if we do indeed observe a gap in capital for Latin American-based founders, and clearly capital isn't necessarily a constraint in this industry. In fact, I think if this industry has anything, is an abundance of capital. So how can we onboard and get more investors interested into allocating into the region? And what function should we think these conversations that we have are part of that, to educate people? And we've had a lot of interest from global VCs at S-tier firms that reach out and say, hey, do you have any deal flow and so forth? But what are other efforts and initiatives that we can activate such that we bring more capital to the region?
Well, the first thing is there needs to be success cases in the region, so that VCs in general, it's unfortunate, but they do act like sheep. And so if you have a success case like it happened with Bridge, I'm sure maybe you guys experienced it more, Kush, from there, but like since Bridge happened, then for example YC started saying like, oh, stablecoins are amazing, and Stripe, I think they just kind of like ramped up everything because they acquired Bridge, and now they're launching their own L1. Outside of investing in for a long time, I mean, obviously they funded Coinbase and they have had some really interesting successes in crypto, but just because they shoot so much that, it happened to them. But in general, YC is not specialized in crypto. But now with stablecoins, they started kind of like going in that, with that narrative. And I think it just happened because of the Bridge acquisition. And I think there is a new kind of interest in the region just because of that. So it's the same for us. Like, we actually at Alliance started investing in AI only companies about a year ago, because some of the teams at Alliance started to pivot into AI, and just because some teams that we really liked were solving the problem that they needed to solve it with AI. Initially, they thought that they had some crypto aspect to it, but then we realized no, they just do the AI part, and then maybe if you need crypto in the future, you can do that. But for Alliance to attract a lot of crypto AI talent, we have to first have one team at Alliance that comes out of our program in the AI space that is successful, so that everybody like other AI founders apply to us. And I think it's the same concept applied regionally, right? Like, you need to be able to highlight success cases in Latin America, so that more and more people are interested to invest in the region. I would say that that's one case. And I do know that there's another team in Argentina that is trying to do a little bit of lobbying and work with the government to try to improve the way regulations are being done. I know the president, Milei, I don't know, I'm not pro or against him, but I do know that he's trying to make regulations much simpler in the country. I heard that he's trying to have only 6 different types of tax for individuals and companies. That's really good. If you apply that same concept to regulations in general, that will definitely create a lot more innovation. So again, there might be regulation. I think is a big part of it. Success cases is another big part of it. And I think finally just security. Potentially, if I have to say something else, it's like security. Like physical security of living in Latin America, so that potentially more international founders can go and live in our countries and experience firsthand those problems and be excited to solve them. But they first need to go and live there without feeling that they're going to get, robbed or killed on the streets.
Yeah, well, that's terrible, but definitely one thing that we need to solve. And Simon, well, thank you for coming. I think we're going to be posting more episodes together. It's exciting. And where can people find you? Where can people find Alliance?
Potentially best place to follow me is my Twitter, which is here under my image, Simon Builds. And for Alliance, they can find us on Twitter at Alliance DAO. Or our website is Alliance XYZ, where they can actually read more about us and potentially apply to our program. And I'm very responsive on Twitter. My Twitter is open, actually. So if anybody wants to talk to me, that's the best way. And yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate the space.
No, thank you, man. And as always, go and read our essays. I think that we're definitely writing the best content about crypto in frontier markets. You can find us in Twitter, in Frontera, and 0x Kush, Abraham CR. And as always, thank you for listening and see you next time. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thanks. Ciao.